Chapter 15. Situation Today and the Path Forward. Sadly, at present, the situation inside Tibet looks grim. The policies of Xi Jinping, who visited Tibet in 2021, the first visit of a Chinese leader in more than 30 years, seem to be focused on the tightening of control and intensification of measures aimed at assimilation. For example, on the language front, Chinese is being enforced as the primary medium in education, aimed at creating a generation of Tibetans whose first language will be Chinese, not Tibetan. There are worrying reports of children, according to some sources, up to 1 million, being taken away from their families and placed in Mandarin-only boarding schools, suggesting that the Chinese government is adopting a totally discredited colonial practice. Alarmed by this new development, in December 2023, the European Parliament passed a resolution condemning this kind of forced assimilation of Tibetan children in Chinese state-run boarding schools and called for immediate cessation of the practice. Similar concerns were raised by the United Nations Human Rights Council, as well as the United States Congress. This practice, in fact, contradicts China's own constitution, which guarantees that all nationalities have the freedom to use and develop their own language. It is also in direct violation of the law on regional national autonomy, which stipulates that schools and other educational institutions with ethnic minority students may use their own language for teaching. I am deeply concerned by this situation. On the religious front, there is a new policy of direct control by the party over monasteries and nunneries, imposing intensified surveillance and control over the monastic communities. I am told that today there are police stations within the compounds of many monasteries. The Tibetan monasteries are also being forced to have communist Chinese officials within the administration of the monastery's management. This tightening around the Tibetan people's religious life, including especially the monasteries, began in 2017 with a specific policy adopted by China's State Council's Regulation on Religious Affairs. In brief, various new regulations are being introduced, all aimed at what the Chinese authorities call promoting Tibetan Buddhism with Chinese characteristics. One of these new regulations states that the monastic curriculum must include courses on politics, laws, regulations, policies, Chinese language, and the history of the relationship between Tibet and the motherland. With respect to the general Tibetan populace, I am informed that in Lhasa and elsewhere, there has been a significant increase in pervasive surveillance of both everyday life and internet use. Community leaders, environmental campaigners, philanthropists, and social activists are especially targeted. There is still no news on the fate of the Panchen Lama, while any display of the Tibetan national flag or my portrait remains banned. In effect, a new social experiment is being conducted through intimidation and forced assimilation, amplified by the apparatus of new technology and digital media. Increasingly, the Tibetans inside Tibet are being made to feel that what is wrong with them from the Chinese authorities' perspective is simply that they are Tibetans. If Beijing were to look at past history, it would see that policies of repression and forced assimilation do not actually work. It is, in fact, counterproductive, with the main result being the creation of generations deeply resentful of Communist China's presence on the Tibetan plateau. If the Chinese leadership truly cares about a stable and harmonious country wherein the Tibetan people could feel at home, its policies need to be grounded in respect for the dignity of Tibetans and to take serious note of their fundamental aspiration to thrive as a people with a distinct language, culture, and religion. If, in the end, Beijing deems our foundational objective to be incompatible within the framework of the People's Republic of China, then the issue of Tibet will remain intractable for generations. I have always stated that, in the end, it is the Tibetan people who should decide their own fate, not the Dalai Lama or, for that matter, the Beijing leadership. The simple fact is no one likes their home being taken over by uninvited guests with guns. This is nothing but human nature. I, for one, do not believe it would be so difficult for the Chinese government to make the Tibetans feel welcome and happy within the family of the People's Republic of China. Like all people, Tibetans would like to be respected, have agency within their own home, and have the freedom to be who they are. The aspirations and the needs of the Tibetan people cannot be met simply through economic development. At its core, the issue is not about bread and butter. It is about the very survival of Tibetans as a people. Finding a resolution of the Tibetan issue would undoubtedly have great benefits for the People's Republic of China. First and foremost, it would confer legitimacy to China's presence on the Tibetan plateau, essential for the status and stability of the People's Republic of China as a modern country composed of multiple nationalities willingly joined in a single family. In the case of Tibet, for instance, it has now been more than 70 years since Communist China's invasion in 1950. Despite the physical control of the country through brutal force as well as economic inducements, the Tibetan people's resentment, persistent resistance in various forms, and moments of significant uprising have never gone away, even though generations and economic conditions have changed. Very little has changed when it comes to the Tibetan people's perception and attitude toward those they still view as occupiers. The simple fact is that, insofar as the Tibetans on the ground are concerned, the Communist Chinese rule in Tibet remains that of a foreign, unwanted, and oppressive occupying power. The Tibetan people have lost so much. Their homeland has been forcibly invaded and remains under a suffocating rule. The Tibetan language, culture, and religion are under systematic attack through coercive policies of assimilation. Even the very expression of Tibetanness is increasingly being perceived as a threat to the unity of the motherland. The only leverage the Tibetan people have left is the moral rightness of their cause and the power of truth. The simple fact is, Tibet today remains an occupied territory, and it is only the Tibetan people who can confer or deny legitimacy to the presence of China on the Tibetan plateau. All my life, I have advocated for non-violence. I have done my utmost to restrain the understandable impulses of frustrated Tibetans, both within and outside Tibet, especially ever since our direct conversations after my exile began with Beijing in 1979. I have used all my moral authority and leverage with the Tibetan people, persuading them to seek a realistic solution in the form of a genuine autonomy within the framework of the People's Republic of China. I must admit, I remain deeply disappointed that Beijing has chosen not to acknowledge this huge accommodation on the part of the Tibetans and has failed to capitalize on the genuine potential it offered to come to a lasting solution. At the time of publishing this book, I will be approaching my 90th year. If no resolution is found while I am alive, the Tibetan people, especially those inside Tibet, will blame the Chinese leadership and the Communist Party for its failure to reach a settlement with me. Many Chinese too, especially Buddhists. Some people told me that there are more than 200 million in mainland China who self-identify as Buddhists, will be disappointed with their government for its failure to solve a problem whose solution has been staring at them for so long. Given my age, understandably, many Tibetans are concerned about what will happen when I am no more. On the political front of our campaign for the freedom of the Tibetan people, we now have a substantial population of Tibetans outside in the free world, so our struggle will go on, no matter what. Furthermore, as far as the day-to-day leadership of our movement is concerned, we now have both an elected executive in the office of the Sikyong, President of the Central Tibetan Administration, and a well-established Tibetan Parliament in exile. People have often asked me if there will be a next Dalai Lama. As early as the 1960s, I have expressed that whether the Dalai Lama institution should continue or not is a matter for the Tibetan people. So, if the Tibetan people feel that the institution has served its purpose, and there is now no longer any need for a Dalai Lama, then the institution will cease, in which case I would be the last Dalai Lama, I have stated. I have also said that if there is continued need, then there will be the 15th Dalai Lama. In particular, in 2011, I convened a gathering of the leaders of all major Tibetan religious traditions, and at the conclusion of this meeting, I issued a formal statement in which I stated that when I turn 90, I will consult the High Lamas of the Tibetan religious traditions, as well as the Tibetan public, and if there is a consensus that the Dalai Lama institution should continue, then formal responsibility for the recognition of the 15th Dalai Lama should rest with the Garden Phodrang Trust, the office of the Dalai Lama. The Garden Phodrang Trust should follow the procedures of search and recognition in accordance with past Tibetan Buddhist tradition, including, especially, consulting the oath-bound Dharma protectors, historically connected with the lineage of the Dalai Lamas, as was followed carefully in my own case. On my part, I stated that I will also leave clear written instructions on this. For more than a decade now, I have received numerous petitions and letters from a wide spectrum of Tibetan people, senior lamas from the various Tibetan traditions, abbots of monasteries, diaspora Tibetan communities across the world, and many prominent and ordinary Tibetans inside Tibet, as well as Tibetan Buddhist communities from the Himalayan region and Mongolia, uniformly asking me to ensure that the Dalai Lama lineage be continued. In the official statement I issued in 2011, I also pointed out that it is totally inappropriate for Chinese communists who explicitly reject religion, including the idea of past and future lives, to meddle in the system of reincarnation of lamas, let alone that of the Dalai Lama. Such meddling, I pointed out, contradicts their own political ideology and only reveals their double standards. Elsewhere, half joking, I have remarked that before Communist China gets involved in the business of recognizing the reincarnation of lamas, including the Dalai Lama, it should first recognize the reincarnations of its past leaders, Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. In summing up my thoughts on the question of the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama in that 2011 official statement, I urged that unless the recognition of the next Dalai Lama is done through traditional Tibetan Buddhist methods, no acceptance should be given by the Tibetan people and Tibetan Buddhists across the world to a candidate chosen for political ends by anyone, including those in the People's Republic of China. Now, since the purpose of a reincarnation is to carry on the work of the predecessor, the new Dalai Lama will be born in the free world, so that the traditional mission of the Dalai Lama, that is, to be the voice for universal compassion, the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, and the symbol of Tibet embodying the aspirations of the Tibetan people, will continue.